All right, so grammar and craft this week. It's actually not a task. I'm just going to shed some light on hedges, and then I'll ask you to listen to the lecture and pay attention to your organization, right, to see if you have any hedges, and if so, to make sure you're using them appropriately. So I've spent some time in individual comments cautioning students against hedges. Hedges are things like maybe I have a point to make, or it seems like this character is doing X or Y or Z. And I have historically said, be firm, be confident. This week is all about confidence and academic voice. And so I just want to pause for a moment and say that hedging language can actually be really effective in academic language. Sometimes they are appropriate. So this is the counter argument, but then I'll bring it back around to why there is a good reason not to use hedges in literary analysis. So let's look at where hedges can be effective. This is all taken from the George Mason University Writing Center website. They have a nice Writing Center website. So I've just lifted this stuff directly from there. First, they're giving us an example here. Children living in poverty do poorly in school. All right. So this is a kind of statement that is much more effective and much more accurate when it's hedged. When we say something like, many children living in poverty do poorly in school, or it would seem that children living in poverty tend to do poorly in school, or sometimes, those kinds of words that show us while we can make a generalization, we need to be mindful of the very many exceptions to that generalization, or to just acknowledge it as a trend and not a truth. So by adding the word tend to in this second example, a writer acknowledges this is just a tendency and there are plenty of poor children who are successful in school. It's an extreme example because I'm sure you can hear how it's not only inaccurate, it's offensive, it's inaccurate in an emotional way. So when it comes to research, when it comes to a lot of summation statements like this, we're going to see more hedges. And it happens a lot in the world of science. So this is kind of a fun example from my family that I'll show you. This is my family group text with my sisters, my brothers, all their various partners, my parents. So my sister Erin wrote, "Is it possible to get COVID twice in 2 months? I am sure it's just a cold, but my cough keeps getting worse." All right, Erin is a first grade teacher. She's not writing this from a medical perspective, but my sister-in-law Kathy is a doctor at a hospital, and she writes this, and I love this response because it's full of hedges, and it is so scientific. It is fairly unlikely to be reinfected from COVID in that short period of time. A cough can persist after the initial infection. Initial studies suggest immunity for 60 days, but data is still unclear and cannot establish, nor may ever be able to establish, clear immunity. Err in the belief that you have a cold. It's a great response that captures Kathy's perspective as a medical doctor, where she is going to capture the studies that she knows. She's going to reflect on the databases that she can access, and she is going to make the kinds of proper hedged statements that will allow my sister to make a good decision without guaranteeing any sort of outcome. You're going to see this kind of language really commonly in the world of law as well. And I remember working in finance, and we had a lawyer who would advise us, and she would often say things like, "It seems that," or "it is likely that," or "it is probable that." Stating the truth so bald-faced is a rhetorical device. It is not necessarily a reflection of the reality. All right, so here is a nice chart to gather up a lot of the sentence structures that might use hedges that you could see. And you're going to see these in research and science and all of these different worlds that I've mentioned, but you might see them too in literature and literary analysis. I think that if you pause the screen and read through them, some of them will really sink in with you as effective, appropriate in some cases. I especially want to look at the last one, the expressions showing writer's distance. So when we're looking at scholarly works about different texts, you might find yourself writing, "In the view of many scholars, Dostoevsky wrote from a place that criticized social progressivism." Right? I mean, it's not going to make strong statements about things that can't be known. Not be known fully, anyway. And yet, we're going to move into an example where I think the hedges don't work as effectively. So let's use this paragraph, and we're going to contrast it to a paragraph that I've created about literature, crime and punishment. So I'm going to highlight a couple of sentences here using my cursor. This is a short research piece about how musicians' studies might suggest have a sharper cognitive function than non-musicians. And so they are trying to explain why. They say, first, it is possible that only the more intellectually rigorous people continue with music training. It is possible. There's your hedge. If I were to take that away, only the more intellectually rigorous, it's easy to disagree with me. You can poke holes all over that argument. But by writing, it is possible, I've protected myself in my argument. Or later on in this piece, you see the exact same thing. It is possible that the difference between musicians and non-musicians is actually innate. It's a bold claim, and they're softening that so that they can have a stronger buttressed argument. Okay, and so here is an example, paragraph style, just like we saw, but instead of being a research genre, this is literary analysis. This is me writing on Rodion Raskolnikov. And I'm using similar sentence stems to try to draw that direct comparison. So I write, Rodion Raskolnikov seems like he might be experiencing some sort of traumatic mental episode. Lots of hedges there. It's almost like he doesn't have any control over his thought processes and that those thoughts somewhat control him. It is possible that he kills the pawnbroker in a fit of temporary insanity, but it is possible that he knows exactly what he is doing. Pause. And you can read the rest of it if you like, but I'm going to use those it is possible statements to show that it's inappropriate for me to not take a stand there. Literature is an artifice. It's a presentation of an unreal world for moral or otherwise edification. Dostoevsky is proposing this world and letting us use it to make whatever claims we need to make about humanity, about the philosophies in his book. And so I am meant to have an opinion about the moment of the murder. Does he have full capacity mentally in that moment, or doesn't he? I need to decide. And I need to decide based on the evidence of the scene that I've got. I'm going to choose the evidence that supports my perspective. But I cannot say both things in the same way that I absolutely should and would be responsible to do if I were reflecting on a scientific study that was not fully proven. It's going to be impossible for me to completely, 100% prove what Rodion Raskolnikov is going through in that moment, but he's also not a real person. And so nobody can. Instead, the literary analyst has to take the best evidence available and state it with a rhetorical confidence. So we're in a different world here. Different even than what we do next week when I'll ask you to write short little mini research paragraphs on what you've discovered. All right, so put another way, I'll go back. The hedges in the non-model, they do not soften the academic statements. Rather, they disqualify the statements. They place those thoughts too deeply within a subjective reader response where nothing can be incorrect and nothing can be correct. It is okay to use hedges when something is unprovable with the evidence at hand, but when there is evidence at hand, you have to use it with confidence, with power, and with arrangement. You arrange your line of reasoning. And in the world of literary study, there is often evidence at hand, or you wouldn't be making the claim you're making. So I've edited this, and I'm just going to show you this first part, so you can always pause and read all of it. I'm trying to eliminate my hedges and say more confidently, more precisely what it is that I see. So Rodion Raskolnikov experiences a traumatic mental break at the moment of his murders. He doesn't have any control over his thought processes, and he reads those thoughts as superstitious harbingers of what must follow. The great tragedy of his crime is he does not know why he wields the axe in the first place, not clearly. I deleted a lot of stuff here. The court rules, that's my evidence, that he kills the pawnbroker in a fit of temporary insanity, but in the days before, he plans out the murders with cold calculations. Yet, at the scene of the murders, his right hand does not know what his left is doing, and he makes colossal mistakes, leaving the door open for Lizaveta to wander into the grisly scene, bumbling through the stolen goods and forgetting them under a rock. So I'm starting to collect my evidence to show why my statements are confidently true. I think there is a moment where hedges can be beautiful, and it is in the conclusion, because that's where you're at the scenic view and you're starting to make sweeping statements about maybe all of humanity, things that can't be proven, and it wouldn't be too fair for us to claim that we could. But the body of the argument, we can, and we should be confident defenders of the claims that we have selected. So, again, no task. Instead, when you have your other impossible question this week, deliberately choosing things that are really difficult to answer, be mindful of hedges. Are you using them appropriately? If they're softening moments, are they softening the right moments? I leave that to you and look forward to seeing what you come up with.